corporate engagement in cultural moments, less statements, more impact. Angel cut her teeth in education as an assistant principal before launching the Spice Suite, a retail shop based in Washington, D.C. that sells spices and kitchenware. The company doubles as a dream incubator for Black female entrepreneurs. Sorry, my screen is just doing some crazy things now. For Black female entrepreneurs or Spice Girls, each of whom sells handmade or specially sourced products through regular pop-ups hosted by the store. Members of the Spice Girl Club benefit from monthly educational webinars and workshops led by business experts. The Spice Suite generated $1.5 million in revenue for 2020, more than $1 million more than in the previous year. And the Spice Suite was recognized in Beyonce's The Black Parade route, so welcome. We also have Dominique, who is a collaborative, detail-oriented communications professional with a passion for data and people-first storytelling. She specializes in strategic corporate communications, helping organizations navigate the challenges of today, solve problems, act with agility, and to anticipate social risk and build admirable reputations, relationships, and solutions to succeed. Thank you for joining us today. All right, up next, we also have Erin, who is a brand manager, where she is in a hybrid role working on both the Dove Hair Innovation and Dove Masterbrand Purpose Engagement teams. In her current role, she helps lead Dove's purpose-driven communications with a specific focus on championing the crown, creating and respectful and open world for natural hair act. The ambition of the Crown Act is to foster beauty, inclusivity, and to prohibit schools and workplaces from discriminating against people based on their natural hairstyles. To date, the Crown Act has been passed in 7 states, so welcome, Erin. Our panel will be moderated by Elle Arlook, and I will go ahead and pass the mic to you all. Thank you for joining us today to kick off day 3 of our summit.
Thank you, Mariella. I appreciate that introduction, and I am excited to kick off today's conversation. Thank you to the organizers and leaders of Power to Fly for convening such a powerful 3 days of discussion around issues that are incredibly relevant and timely for us all. Would also like to say Happy International Women's Day to our panelists and all that are joining us today, which is a perfect segue into today's conversation, particularly in light of the gender pay gap AI bot that is dominating conversation for leveraging the transparency of the UK gender pay data policies to call out companies launching International Women's Day campaigns while paying women inequitably within their companies. Just over the past few months, we've seen many brands both take steps in the right direction and take major missteps in an effort to embrace cultural moments like Lunar New Year and Black History Month as platforms to continue communicating their commitment to historically excluded communities. I'm looking forward to exploring this with our panelists today, who each represent a unique point of view and a different part of the puzzle. Thank you, ladies, for joining us. I'm excited to dig right in. First, let's start by going around and having you each introduce yourself a little bit. I'd love to know your role, where you're based, and maybe a fun fact about yourself to allow our participants to get to know you a little bit better before we dive in. How about we start with Dom?
Hey, yeah. First of all, thank you to Power to Fly and Elle and APCO. A little bit about me. I used to work at APCO, so coming on the other side of this, and I'm so happy to be here and that Elle asked me to join. So I'm the Employee and Sustainability Communications Lead at Vimeo, several months in now, and in my role, I'm responsible for all internal communications across the company, but I also help make sure that we're communicating about our DEI and social impact strategy. So I wear a couple different hats. And I think as it relates to this panel in particular, I'm responsible for making sure that we have a globally inclusive hat on with all communications that go out across the company.
Thanks, Dawn. Erin, how about you next?
Perfect. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Elle, for personally reaching out to me to participate in this. I'm really, really happy to be here today and looking forward to this discussion. So I'm born and raised in Washington, D.C., but I'm actually located in New York. I've been with Unilever since about 2016, working across a number of different brands, currently working on the Dove Masterbrand. So that means basically all of our purpose communication, as well as the Dove innovation team. Innovation meaning anytime we want to create new products, if we see gaps in the portfolio, it's creating those products start to finish. And then the Masterbrand team is more of that external facing communications, the commercials, the digital assets, kind of what you think about when you hear traditional marketing. And a fun fact, I'm trying to think, I guess I can use like a COVID fun fact. I've been trying to take advantage of not having to be in the office and work in as many different places as possible. So I spent a couple months this time last year working in the Caribbean, which was amazing. So it'll be quite a shake up when we have to go back to the office in a couple of months.
Nice. A little jealous of that one. I should have picked up on that train. Angel, how about you?
Hi guys, thank you so much for having me. I am Angel Gregorio. I am a spice girl. So I own a spice shop in Washington, D.C. I travel the world for spices with my husband and my children. And I have used my space as a dream incubator because I recognize that Black women in particular just need spaces where we can be unapologetic about who we are, what we create, how we create, and that the uniqueness of our identity needs a unique space in order to display it. So I've allowed Black women and men to pop up in my space free of charge since we opened in 2015. Fun fact about me is that I am a former assistant principal, and my first teaching job was actually at a youth jail.
Thanks, Angel. Excited to dig into this conversation. I've got a question for each of you based on kind of where you sit as part of this puzzle. Dom, we're going to start with you again. It's great that we've gotten to the point where many companies are openly celebrating the identities of their employees, from offering lessons on Black history in February to hosting Pride celebrations in June. However, many times these acknowledgements do not last past the month, if that. What are ways that we can have a 365-day celebration and acknowledge our team's cultures and identities all year long? How should teams beyond DEI, such as your employee communications team, be thinking about this and integrating this viewpoint into their strategies?
Thanks, Elle. And I'm realizing I forgot my fun fact. So mine is that I'm also a yoga instructor on the side. But I alluded to in my intro that I make sure that I wear a globally inclusive hat at all times. And I think that's something that helps extend the moments that you celebrate Black History Month and Lunar New Year and International Women's Day. It helps extend it beyond those sort of peak moments, if you will, throughout the whole year. It sounds a little trivial, but I think it's some of the like very small tactical things of, are you making sure that when you host an event, it's not on a Friday when your Israel office isn't working? Are you making sure that it's earlier on in the day so you're being respectful of your colleagues in the Asian countries and in APAC? I think it's the small things and making sure that whatever you do, whatever you send out, isn't applicable to everyone. You know, I think at my role here at Vimeo, we have offices all around the world, and we need to send communications out to the whole company at all times. But sometimes they're not applicable to the rest of the world, you know, and I think that's something that we're working on, even with benefits that are specific to the US that, you know, legally are not applicable in other parts of the world. We're making sure that when we talk about it, we are wearing our global hats and making sure that it's applicable to the people we are talking to. And I think that's really important. And I spend most of my days just sort of poking holes in the comms that we send out and making sure, you know, this isn't going to work for this time zone. This isn't going to work for these people. This isn't applicable to them. And I think it starts small. And as you start to do that and build it as a habit across the business and with teams and making sure that everyone is sort of keeping that hat on at all times, it starts to extend the impact that you can have around the rest of the year, you know. And I think it even can start with things like employee resource group events. I mean, we just had so many events for Black History Month at Vimeo, and making sure that they are at times that other parts of the world can join. You know, Black History Month is something that kind of started in the US, but it is globally applicable. And if others want to tune in and learn, we have to make it accessible for them.
I like what you were talking about in terms of creating systems to just make this kind of a matter of habit, right? And so the idea that a lot of the missteps we see, particularly on the agency side when companies are dealing with challenges, is because of missed opportunities, right? It's always much harder to kind of embed this type of recognition of cultures, recognition of kind of where people sit around the world proactively than it is to kind of backtrack when you miss an opportunity to make an employee feel seen and heard, and that you understand their unique experiences. And so I think the work you're doing to create systems is certainly an important piece of that puzzle. Angel, how about we look at you next? Your business model is centered on multiplying your impact among Black women businesses and men. I also know your inbox is inundated with requests from brands to partner with you, particularly around moments like Black History Month. If any of you stepped foot in a Nordstrom over the past month, you would have smelled and hopefully tasted her amazing partnership on a soul food stew in the Nordstrom Cafe. And as brands look to create meaningful partnerships, what can they learn from your model? And how should they be engaging with Black-owned, women-owned businesses in a way that makes an impact beyond a single moment in time?
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like the only way that companies will be able to make like sustainable, real change and impact when it comes to like diversity is to start with hiring, right? Like if people who look like me are in the rooms when these conversations are had, there's really no way that you can forget to highlight Black women when there's a Black woman in every room that you walk into. But I think because there isn't enough diversity on staffs, it's never shocking to most of us when we see these campaigns from, these major brands who do the most egregious things when it comes to, kind of racism. It's like, wait, how did that clear? Like, how did it get through all these rooms? And you realize it got through all these rooms because none of these rooms had people who look like us in it. And so I don't think that any real change will be made until real changes are made in terms of HR and hiring. And it becomes, as Dom said, like it just becomes a habit, right? In terms of hiring, like a habit in hiring, that we are not hiring a Black person to head DEI, like we are hiring Black people, we're hiring women, we're hiring, the ranges of folks to represent our organization preemptively so that we know any decision that we make has to be inclusive, because we can't forget about the person sitting next to me. I can't not include a woman and I'm sitting next to several of them. And for me, for my brand, that has been important to me. And even choosing who I partner with as a small business. I think, I'm probably the smallest business of those here, right? So as a small business owner, I think sometimes it's really easy to want to partner when, these major brands reach out and it's like, this sounds like a really good opportunity financially. And I'm a small business and I could use this money, but I also have to make sure that there's alignment and that this brand isn't just like using me to be the Black face of their company for, Black History Month. And speaking of, transparently in the partnership with Nordstrom, we had done things prior to this. So Nordstrom didn't just reach out for Black History Month. They had paid me to do things. I've done things like this with Nordstrom beforehand. And so when it came to Black History Month, it was kind of an extension of the conversations and the partnership that we had and the opportunity for me to try something fun with them. And it worked out. And I was grateful for that they didn't just use me for these conversations, that we've been having it. And this was just like the next logical step for us to partner. And the conversation hasn't ended with them. I've still heard from Nordstrom after Black History Month. So that also just felt really good.
I love to hear those good examples. I'm sure many of us saw some of the conversation at the top of Black History Month dominating mostly Instagram channels around Black women who have full inboxes on January 30th asking for partnerships on February 1st. And the added kind of dynamic that unfortunately, it's usually a person of color who's asked to make those calls last minute to bring Black businesses on board. So this idea of fostering relationships year round and really leaning in and investing in those relationships to make them more authentic and also more valuable to both sides of the table when you do need to kind of double down on those partnerships during certain times of the year, I think is such an important message. And there's no better segue, I think, to Erin and to talk a little bit about Dove. I have to say, I've got a brand crush on Dove. I think Dove does all things right. And if we want to look at a model of an organization that is really being intentional with their approach, it's hard to look much further than Dove. So Erin, Dove is one of the few brands where leaders in the industry would say they're getting this right. The work that your team has done to spearhead and advocate for the Crown Act, the recently launched As Early as 5 campaign, which put me in tears as soon as I saw it as the mother of a young Black girl. And the product partnership with Matthew Cherry and Hair Love shows an approach to impact that goes far beyond product and sales-based kind of performative partnerships. I'd love to hear more about your work on these efforts and why it's the right approach for Dove from a business standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about Early as 5, that campaign, and Hair Love at nauseum. I'm very passionate about both. So I'll start just by explaining what each of the two are, and then I think I'll just pick one to go deep on. And I think I'll focus on Hair Love because I think it's a great example of exactly what Angel's talking about, that long-term partnership versus just showing up when it's easy and convenient for the brand. So for those of you who aren't aware, Dove is a co-founder of the Crown Coalition. The Crown Coalition is all about advancing the Crown Act. And for those who aren't aware, the Crown Act, the ambition is to end race-based hair discrimination in the US. Right now, there's been tons of stories in the news where you hear of a young boy being told he can't graduate unless he cuts his locks, or a young girl being sent home from school because of her braids. And seeing countless stories like this, we decided as a brand, we want to do something. And I think, what's important is finding something that is true to you as a brand versus just hopping on any topic. Dove as a brand is all about beauty inclusivity. So whether that is body inclusivity and making women feel comfortable for the body that they're in, whether that is about hair. So I think that was what was, I think, critical to this idea and concept is we're not just jumping on anything that has to do with race, but it's something that's very true and inherent to Dove as a brand. So the Early as 5 campaign, the ambition of that was, how do we raise awareness of the Crown Act? A lot of people might say, oh, like, we know that there's things around race-based hair discrimination, but we might not know all the details behind it. So that film is showing a young girl starting as a 5-year-old through different stages in her life to say that this starts early and the impact lasts a lifetime for Black women and men. And everyone's situation is different, but usually it's just not a one-off microaggression. These are things that compound over time. And this campaign was rooted in research. So we actually have research that shows, 80% of young Black girls who have experienced hair discrimination, it starts as early as 12. For 5-year-olds, is 53% of young Black girls. So we saw the data, and then we wanted to create a campaign to support that. So that's the Early as 5 launch. And then Hair Love, this one is like very, very near and dear to me because, I was there from the beginning. But the way this started was back in 2017, Matthew Cherry, for those of you who aren't aware of him, Matthew Cherry, former NFL player, now the person behind the Hair Love film, which won an Oscar. So Black man to win an Oscar for his animated film. Back in 2017, Dove saw that he had a Kickstarter. No one knew who he was. I shouldn't say no one knew. He wasn't up for an Oscar. We didn't know what was going to happen with Hair Love. It was very new, and they reached out. And so Dove did an initial donation to their Kickstarter. There was no, hey, for this, we want this in exchange. We thought that Hair Love as a film and as something really aligned to, again, the mission of Dove. And so we had, it wasn't a crazy donation, but we donated. Fast forward to 2020, he's up for an Oscar nomination. 2 weeks prior to that, our team started to notice in the news a young man, DeAndre Arnold. If you Google DeAndre Arnold Oscars or DeAndre Arnold Dove or Matthew Cherry, you'll see a number of articles that are coming up. This young man was told he could not graduate from school unless he cut his locks. We saw it all over the news. We were like, Hair Love is up for an Oscar. We're focused on the Crown Act, and this is hitting national news. What can we do? How can we use this as an opportunity? So what Dove as a brand team did, we hired a celebrity stylist and sent DeAndre Arnold and his mother to the Oscars with Matthew Cherry. And our stance was, your school doesn't think you're fit to walk for graduation, but we think he is more than fit. In fact, he's going to walk the red carpet at the Oscars. So the night before, we hosted a pre-Oscar dinner for Matthew Cherry and his team. Again, we didn't know if he would win or not, but we had DeAndre Arnold there. We surprised him with Gabrielle Union, D. Wade. Matthew Cherry ends up winning the Oscar, mentions the Crown Act. A week later, the Walmart team reaches out to me because I'm also on one half of my job is the Crown Act and the other half of my job is creating new products. And she reached out and said, what if we did like a Dove Hair Love line with Matthew Cherry? And I was like, this is amazing. Immediately reached out to the team. And I mean, this will it was truly a labor of love, because I was like, when you look at the aisles within grocery stores and drugstores, growing up, I didn't see mass products with images that look like me. Imagine a brand like Dove putting young Black girls with Afro puffs on a product and actually creating great products for young kids with textured hair. And so that's exactly what we did. The partnership started as a Kickstarter, went to celebrating his team the night before the Oscars with a dinner, and then went to creating this product line. And so I think very great example of an organic movement that didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen the day before Black History Month. This was from 2017, 2020, and now we're in 2022. And we made this a 5-year partnership with him. It's not just a short-term thing, or it's the opportunity to do 5. He can pull out if he, but again, it was all about a long-term partnership versus just a one-off moment for the brand and his team.
I feel like I see people applauding, so we'll just all applaud to that one. I think there's so many elements of that are incredibly powerful, right? One, I mean, as a mother of a Black little girl who loves her curly hair, but has already had a moment where she asked her hair to be straight because it wouldn't fit under her costume, and her friend at school had straight hair and she wanted her hair flat like her friend, right? Dom will remember that story from my tears on Halloween morning, and Angel knows that story well. The work that you're doing is incredibly powerful, but from a corporate perspective and from kind of the context of this conversation, I think it's powerful to see a brand who has identified a very unique, very niche, but a very real issue that has real impact and real implications, and kind of gone all in, not just marketing, not just branding, but actual policy change, right? Actual investment in changing the systems and the laws and creating a better kind of systemic solution to the discrimination that Black people of all gender and gender identities experience based on their hair. So hats off, and love to see that work and how it's going to continue. So regardless of whether you're determining whether to take on a corporate partner, trying to shift how you communicate internally, or embedding DEI into your policy work, efforts that make an impact are never easy and often face roadblocks. I'd love to ask each of you, or a few of you, if you have something to share on how you've managed roadblocks, whether it's internally or from outside stakeholders to the work that you're trying to progress. Anyone want to take that on first?
I'm happy to take it on. So just to speak about roadblocks that we've encountered. I mean, this sounds like a very, and how we've confronted and overcome, and maybe this is like a scapegoat answer, but I think having, like, when it is an idea that you truly believe in, like Hair Love definitely, there was challenges every step of the way, even things around, even how you negotiate a partnership and a licensing like that, and how do you rethink a model where you're working with creators in a different way. I think for me, it's really having that passion. Again, it sounds basic, but like because I even feel the difference when, like, I like an idea and I'm like, I don't care what it takes, y'all gonna have Hair Love one way. Like, that is truly how and I even look back, like, out of all the projects that I've worked on, I do feel the most passionate about it, because I was like Eleanor is gonna have, like, her daughter is gonna have Hair Love in her, and I think being able to, like, visualize, or being so clear on the end goal, and not just because you want it, but because there is a true business need. And it's not just because I'm a Black woman and I want to have this, but this is a gap. This is something that we need. I think tying it back, being able to tie it back to business with real concrete facts as to why this is, why this is necessary. Like, this is going to be incremental for the Dove portfolio. Right now, we don't have anything for young kids of color. Every research report, that article is talking about how the US is becoming more and more multicultural, that the minority is the new majority. And so I think when you have real facts as much as possible to back those roadblocks, I think that for me, it's the business, the facts, plus the passion, because you need that passion to keep you pushing.
Motivated.
I think for me, that's what I would say. And then I think the roadblocks are, again, when you're when you're going through a negotiation for a licensing deal, you might not get a yes right away. You might get turned down, and finding those advocates and other people within the organization, like, yes, you might not see the vision. I might have to jump over you. I might need to talk to someone else, but also making sure that you're finding those people who have that same level of energy versus just focusing on those who might question the idea. So like, find your own internal advocates, even if they're not exactly on your team, because you're going to need that kind of momentum to keep you going.
I would just add, I completely agree. I think thinking with impact in mind and kind of business implications and how is it authentic to the business. When you think about like internal challenges or even external, I try and think like pie in the sky, biggest possible impact we could have and work backwards from there. Because as from inception of an idea to review and approval at the highest and top of a company internally, every single sphere of approval, they're going to ask why. And when you have that like biggest potential imaginable impact that you could possibly have, when you think and have that in mind from the beginning, I've found that you face less roadblocks and less red tape because you can explain and articulate, this is the unimaginable, but we're imagining it, impact that we can have. And I imagine that, Erin, you dealt with that with Hair Love of like, maybe we can't see how incredible this is going to be in the long run, but we're going to try. And I think that I can imagine that helped make the case internally to, we got to get this off the ground because it has so much potential to drive impact and change.
Angel, I know one of the things I admire most about you is how authentically you show up as yourself in any space that you enter into, right? There is one Angel and you're going to get that Angel, right? And I have to imagine, particularly as brands kind of grapple with how to do partnerships and how to do them authentically, you've likely experienced a brand maybe trying to change that or trying to put parameters around how you show up as yourself. I'd love to hear how you've dealt with that in the past.
I think because I am so clear that I am going to only be me and I'm not code switching and I'm not changing my hair. I had locks too, up until a few months ago for 13 years. So that was, I've dealt with the physical kind of aspect of having to just show up as my full self. But then there are things about like my fashion, right? I do a lot of things that are very public. And, when you do TV in particular, they'll send you the notes about what to wear. And they're like, you can't wear certain colors and certain things on TV because it conflicts. And I will show up in sequins and patterns and mismatches. And I did a whole Hyundai commercial with the grill in my mouth, because that's just who I am. And I like my grill. It was custom made. I'm going to wear my grill. And that's just like who I am. And I feel like so often the people that are telling us or trying to water us down or change us don't even fully understand us. So, sometimes I think it's a very clear decision to try and like make us more calm or appear more tame or less Black. And sometimes I think it's just like a lack of understanding and a lack of desire to understand. And for me, it's like at this point, I'm not really here to try to educate you. I'm here to show up as my full self. Your job is to try and learn more. It's not my job to teach you. Like I left the classroom. I'm no longer trying to teach people who I am. And that's difficult sometimes because you have to be okay with walking away from opportunities, especially as a small business owner. I recently went through a process of acquiring commercial property for the first time. Like my current space I rent, but I now, have a new space that I own, and going through that process of commercial acquisition, it was one of the times where I felt the most discriminated against as a Black woman in business, right? With my spice shop in DC, it's in DC. DC is, it's changing, but most of the folks who frequent my shop are Black. So I don't really, deal with a lot of discrimination when it comes to running my business, but going through this process of trying to get a loan for, $1 million+ I literally had, a guy come on the Zoom from the SBA, like you're supposed to support small business. And we are showing you financials with 7-figure revenue for, the last 3 years. And he's still like, yeah, I really need you, to think about this and whether you really want to pursue a loan this hefty. I'm not sure you know what you're getting yourself into. And spices is such a niche thing. I'm just wondering what you're going to do when people no longer want to, come to spice shops. I think this is a COVID thing. And I just want you to think about it. And I'm like, I'm not here for business plan advice. My business is already in motion. We're almost 7 years old. We have the revenue to show that we can do this. And still you're asking me to reconsider whether my business needs to even exist. Not whether I can afford the loan, but you're asking me philosophical questions about my business. And I know that that's only because I'm a Black woman coming to you. And I come to you with braids and red lipstick and, typically big earrings and all the things. I don't present as, this professional woman who runs a multi-million-dollar business. So they don't approach me that way. And, there are definitely times when it makes you pause and wonder, like, should I put my hair back and maybe, put a blazer on? And I'm grateful that I've never gave into that thought, because it definitely runs through my mind sometimes before a presentation. It's like, this might be too much for, this crowd. And I'm really, really grateful to be able to sit on the fact and stand on the fact that, nope, this is who I am, and they're going to take it or leave it. And what's for me will be for me.
I feel like we got to give you snaps after that one too. You've given us a good kind of segue, and I'll pause and say we've got some questions coming in through the chat function. So feel free to continue sending in questions, and we'll pull from those as we continue this conversation. All of you are from influential brands, and certainly influence takes many different shapes and forms. And so when your brand has an influential voice, you're often called to walk a line between using your platform to celebrate and lean into a responsibility to educate and advocate. We've seen missteps when brands really just focus on celebrating cultures without leveraging their platform to educate or take a stand on issues. How do you think brands should navigate this complexity? Have you seen examples of brands that are getting this right? I should note that we, just as recent as this week, we saw a really interesting released memo from the Disney company that is trying to take a really interesting fine line between taking a stand on the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida and the work that they do to create and increase diverse representation in their content, and their kind of desire to stand on their ability to create content that changes heart and mind as a kind of pass for not taking a stand on legislation or issues that are policy-based that have real implications for people's lives. So I think that's a good recent example of a brand that's really doing an interesting job trying to walk that line. Erin, I'm sure that's something you've experienced at Unilever. I also know that you've got agency experience before that, and Dom, certainly something we've managed quite a bit. And Angel, you as well. So I'd love to hear any thoughts on kind of how can or should brands walk that line between celebrating and advocating?
I can jump in. I'm going to speak from multiple worlds here. From my agency experience and having spent the last, almost 7 years in agency and at APCO with Elle, I think it's difficult to navigate, right? And I think brands want to get it right. And I think one thing that I always try and keep in mind is there's always going to be a critic, and there's always going to be something wrong. But I think it never hurts to try and do what's right. I think the biggest thing in coming back to, and I feel a little bit like a broken record, but it's so true, is making sure that's authentic to the company. If you're speaking out on an issue that you've never talked about before, or that your brand isn't known for, or you can't naturally draw a straight line, like if it's a very dotted, windy line, it might not be the right thing for you to speak out on. But there are other ways where you can take a stand on an issue, and sometimes it might be internally. And I think that's kind of where my role comes into play. Putting my Vimeo hat on, we are a platform, but we also don't discriminate against free speech. So we're trying to find that right balance between what do we take a stand on and where do we kind of draw our hard red lines. And it's really difficult, and sometimes it's messy. But I think always coming back to our principles and what's authentic to us as a business, and making sure that at a minimum, we are speaking to our employees about what our stance is and why we make the decisions that we're making.
For me, when I think about that, it almost feels like it's so easy for brands to celebrate, because the celebration equals dollars, right? Like the celebration and the partnership equals dollars. The advocating actually ruffles feathers. So it's like, if you feel comfortable enough to put me on the face of your, shampoo bottle, then I need you to also feel comfortable enough to stand with me on the front lines. It feels like, Black Lives Matter and all the other things that were happening when folks were throwing dollars at every Black business they could because it was the right time, because George Floyd was just killed, and that just made everybody feel really uncomfortable. And then, but then you don't find these same companies that are like advocating for like just kind of basic rights, for Black people. Like, yes, it's easy to put up a BLM, banner on Instagram for a day, but if you aren't really willing to stand on the front lines and go to bat for this group of people, then just leave us out of your campaigns. Like, it's so simple to me. And when you don't do that, that's what makes the critics feel like this was just monetary, because you're willing to capitalize off of us, but you don't want to fight for us to make sure that I'm not only on your, on the bottle, on your company's bottle. Like, you should want to make sure that you do a good enough job in celebrating me and advocating for me, that this becomes the norm across brands, because you care so deeply about, inclusivity and diversity. And it's not just about the opportunity to monetize a moment.
Absolutely.
No, I agree with everything that was said before. Honestly, I was having a hard time trying to think of how to answer that, because I do think part of the question was brands that are doing it right. And I think for Dove, it really, like, it's not one or the other. I think we celebrate and advocate, and part of celebrating is uplifting. And the way we think about it internally is we talk about brand do, brand say, others say, other do. That's kind of like the four verticals. So using Crown Act as an example, all the legislative work. So we have a legislative strategist that we hire, and every quarter we're looking at what states do we want to tackle, where can we have movement, how can we get this, what are some grassroots efforts that we can do to move the Crown Act forward. That would be the brand do, actually advocating, doing the work. Brand say is something like the Earliest 5 campaign. It's us amplifying the issue, the cause, the work, and also letting people know Dove is behind this. And then there's other say, which is how do we work through others? How do we, whether it's influencers, partners, how do we get others getting our message across? And then others do is how do we also get other people behind us to do the work? So again, using Crown Act as an example, we created this coalition called the Crown Coalition, and we have other organizations such as Jack and Jill, Urban League, the Links, Delta 8. We've found a lot of organizations to also help do the work that we're doing. So I think if you think about it in terms of brand do and brand say, it's like the say can be the celebration and the do could be the advocacy. And it doesn't have to be one or the other. It can be part of how you go to market as a brand.
I really like that framing of brand do, brand say, others do. I think that's a powerful kind of framing, but also a nudge to not just say, but what are you doing as well? I think more brands could use that framing. All of this, and this is kind of a question for you, Angel, I would say, all of this speaks to a need for deeper integration and taking a holistic look at creating impact. For instance, when we're looking at brand partnerships, particularly with small businesses or entrepreneurs, instead of just creating shelf space for brands owned by Black people or historically excluded communities, we're seeing more retail stores dedicate shelf space, build entrepreneur incubator programs, put marketing dollars behind promoting those products, et cetera. What should sustainable partnerships look like that don't just benefit the big company, but also benefit the small business or the entrepreneur who's able to use this as a platform to really launch themselves?
Yeah, I think that partnerships with major brands and getting into big box retail spaces is always like a great opportunity for a small business. I think the part, and we know about those, right? Like we know about the Target Accelerator, we know about all these different programs that are put in, but what we don't know, or most people I know because I've, had conversations, is like the fine print that is kind of oppressive. Like, yes, you are giving me an opportunity to come into your store, but you want 70% of my profit. and you don't help me with marketing at all, and I'm not guaranteed, and I have to pay for the shipping and the pack, there's so much fine print that goes into it, where it's one of those things where, on social media, in the commercial, when you scroll, when you see the header, the headline is riveting, right? It like captivates you, like, wow, they're looking, I get the emails, Target is looking for 350 new Black brands to bring in. And then when you read the fine print of it, it's like, man, who could really afford to do that? Like even at the space that my business is in, sometimes I read through some of these partnership opportunities, even with simple things like on social media, right? Unless they're like this top 1% of like TikTok influencers who might get, or in the Kardashians, right? Who get the $1 million checks for posting something. But it's like, you want me to post something, you want me to spend the time to create some content to co-brand and, and help to bring my followers over to your brand. But you don't really show me financially that you value what I do and what I bring. Like, you reached out for a reason. So why doesn't the check match that? Like, why don't I feel that? And it's hard, because it's hard for, I think, Black women to advocate for themselves financially anyway, right? Even if it's hiring for a traditional job, even more so as the Black woman who's leading a small business, and I'm having to negotiate with, some major brand about how I don't think this is enough money for what you're asking, where, like, how do you have those conversations? So I feel like that's the kind of support that's needed. Like, there needs to be some support around, like, how do you negotiate, when you're trying to enter a brand partnership? How do you negotiate the margins when you're going into big box retail? What does it look like for you to be able to ask, and maybe offer some legal support? Because a lot of times you get these contracts and you sign them because you don't have money to pay an attorney to read through a contract that was just sent over to you for some quick deal. So there's so many other supports that are needed around negotiation and legal that I think small businesses need, so that they can effectively partner and advocate for themselves, so that these can be long-term partnerships.
I think that also goes back to your original point about having people at the table who can flag some of those things, right? If you have people of color at the table, if you have people who specialize in small business ownership at the table, being able to say, hey, this is a very high barrier that you're setting. If our point here is to broaden the base of opportunities to people, we need to be removing barriers, not setting up more barriers that are harder for people to jump over. And a lot of that goes back to people in the room being comfortable and empowered to ask questions.
Yeah.
I'm going to go to some of the audience questions. Sonia, this is one for you, which I know you answer often and proudly. Sorry, Angel, this one is for you from Sonia. Question for Angel. In the early days of your business, did you feel it was necessary to intentionally brand your business to be generic so that it appealed to a wide audience, or was it okay to specifically brand for an audience of color?
I've always been okay with branding for an audience of color. And I know that a lot of my friends in business don't feel that level of comfort. It was always okay with me. I struggle with like packaging and labeling, and folks who, like Elle, who've been a part of my journey from the beginning, know that when I started the Spice Suite, because this was like a random thing that I didn't plan to open this business, my labels were terrible. Like, they barely said anything, let alone the name of my store. And it was really, really basic. And as I've grown, I've really wanted, it's like the more the business has grown, the more important it has become for me to make it clear that this is owned by a Black woman. So every single product in my store has a seal on it that says made in Washington, D.C. by a Black woman. I'm a proud D.C. native. I'm a proud Black woman. And so I want that to be on it, on my bags that people take when they leave, no matter what you look like. It says really big, thank you for supporting this Black business. Like, I want people to like have to look at that when they get home, whether they intentionally came in because we were a Black business or not. I really want people to have to sit with the fact that, like, one, I supported a Black business today. Great. We appreciate you, thousands of people, right? But also it's like, I love this product and it just happens to be made by a Black woman. Like, that's the part that I want to get to, where folks are not just coming in out of protest, but because it's a good product. But the reminder is always going to be on my products that it's handmade by a Black woman.
I love that. Erin, I'd actually pose a similarly framed question to you, particularly since the focus of Crown Act and as early as 5 is quite specific to people of color and people of color with hair, regardless of their gender identity or expression. And so I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that, whether that was an uphill battle or if there's anything that you can speak to around how that was received, particularly by employees maybe, or the marketplace on kind of a specific effort focusing on this community.
I don't necessarily feel like it was an uphill battle. I think what's always going to be interesting in a discussion, no matter what the topic is, resourcing. How much money, there's finite resources, there's number of different priorities. So I think the ongoing conversation is always going to be, how do we resource for this versus something else? How long is this going to be? Are we going to be doing Crown Act for a year, 2 years, 5 years? What does this look like? And I think what's been helpful is, again, it's all about the results, the traction. So let's say that there was a bit of, uphill battle or challenges. It has shown that this is something that has continued to take off. So like even with the bio, which I guess I need to go up and update, like the number of states where we're actually seeing legislative change happening is increasing all the time. We're at either 13 or 14 right now. I think when you read the bio, it was at 7 when I wrote it. And so I think because we're actually seeing real change, now it's like we're not going to stop until we see this pass on a federal level, or ideally all 50 states will pass the Crown Act legislation. So I think, again, sometimes there might be uphill battles, but also when you see the results, it's kind of like, well, we can't pull back now because the Black community is going to be like, wait, what? Yeah, it's like we're in too deep now. So now it's like you can't really pull out. So I think that also helps, is that when you have an idea, and sometimes it's just about getting started. Maybe you don't get all the resourcing right away, but you show the incremental results and you think about it more of a long-term play versus short-term.
I think that's a powerful idea and something that we work on a lot with clients. So I lead our equity and justice practice here at APCO. And a lot of the work that we do sometimes is kind of trying to subvert the system a little bit and create an environment where we're setting goalposts, right, that now have to continue to be met, right? And sometimes that can be in a big way, like launching a campaign that, if we launch this, it's going to be really hard for us to back away from that. And that's part of the strategy for getting us to take on that part of an initiative. It can also be as simple and as kind of seemingly low lift as like helping an organization redefine what they mean by diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? We work for I will just go ahead and say, very conservative, Southern, large university. Uphill battle is certainly a way to describe some of our equity and justice work there. Very well intentioned, but it's a big system. It's a big Southern system that's hard to move. And so one thing we focused on there is how do we get them to update their diversity and inclusion statement so that now you're setting a marker, right? Because the minute you change your definition from something relatively bland to things that are very forward looking, like, we respect all people, and we go farther than that, right? By really naming the audiences that you prioritize in your DEI work: gender expression, gender identity, sexual identity, orientation. We added a laundry list of kind of indicators for how they define diversity. And now we're able to go back and say, well, you published a new diversity statement, you published a new diversity definition. What are you doing to advance the environment for people that you now define your focus is on? Right. And so sometimes change doesn't have to be tackling a big campaign or tackling a big advocacy issue. If you feel like you're in a company where even changing our definition will start helping us move the goalposts. Another question from the audience, and maybe Dom, this is one that you want to tackle first. Can you talk about how company culture impacts employee engagement?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that question. I think it's a couple different things. From my, personal seeping into professional perspective, company culture directly impacts employee engagement, and employee engagement directly impacts company culture. And I think it's a bit of kind of a cyclical loop, if you will. I think one thing to always keep in mind, and I don't want it to be a scapegoat, but it is something to keep in mind, is there will always be a critic. But Elle, to your point about updating the university's DEI statement, I do believe that if you stand for everything, you stand for nothing. And so if the company's stance is kind of vague and, we accept everyone, well, that doesn't really get into the specifics, and inherently some group is going to be left out. Some identity, some perspective, some, you name it, is going to be left out if you don't sort of name it and claim it. And I think it's really important to keep that in mind with how you go about kind of DEI specific, but kind of all company communications that you put out, is keeping in mind all of the audiences and making sure, like, is this communication reflective of the employee base that we're speaking to? And I think the only way to know that is to have kind of an open feedback loop. Are you surveying the employees and being like, do you feel like our communications are representative of your sentiment and how you feel? And I say there will always be people who don't align with it and might be on the fringes of that. But I think the best way to kind of keep that balance between company culture and employee engagement and make sure that they're really in sync with one another is to make sure that they're actually talking to one another and that you have like an ongoing feedback loop. Because the more your employees are in line with your company stance and the way that you're crafting a culture, and it's very fluid, the more that employees will want to engage with it. So it's an ongoing effort.
Following up on that question, I think we've got another related question that I'm also happy to share some thoughts on. But is there any relationship between company culture and productivity of an employee?
Yeah. Yeah. I think if you, there's, oh my gosh, there's so much that goes into that. I mean, if it's a culture of entrepreneurialism, I work in a company that's like that. I came from a company that's like that. People are motivated to want to succeed, but it goes back to that kind of open loop and open, what is the word I'm looking for? Like door of communication between like the company and the powers that be, at large, and the employees. I think you have to inspire your employees, but you also have to know what inspires them. And in order to know that, you have to ask them and you have to speak with them and you have to understand. So if you're seeing kind of employee productivity go down the drain, there's probably something that you can do to fix it. And it's probably something that just requires a conversation and understanding what's needed and what's missing, and then figure out how to fill that gap.
Yeah, I'll just kind of add to that from my kind of lens, from working in education, right? Like we would always say that kids learn from teachers they like. Right. And not that you're there to be their friends, but people who are likable. It's much easier for you to learn from people who just are much more approachable. They're likable. And so I always carry that even into my space now as an employer, right? Like I always, and then when I was in education as an administrator, as an assistant principal, I tried to be really mindful that I needed to remain like open so that the folks who were supposed to learn from me could actually access me and learn from me. And another thing that I find, kind of relevant, it seems to be in corporate. I've never worked in corporate, so you guys' lens is definitely different from mine, but there's also this notion, that I learned in education too, that like every child needs a champion, right? And that doesn't just apply to kids. I think sometimes some of my fundamental things that I learned in working in education, I've been able to apply to my adult relationships too. And not because I treat my adult relationships like they're kids, but because we all need the same kind of gentleness and pushing and support, and understanding that every kid needs a champion. As an employer, I see myself as like the champion for my team, right? So they need someone to cheer for them, to root for them, to believe in them, to push them, to sit down, like Dom said, and like learn about what their goals are, what their aspirations are, whether it be with my company or beyond. Like my goal, my job is to be the champion. And I feel like employers, whether it be corporate or small business, like your job is to be, in some ways likable, right? And your job is to be the champion for your teammates, because when people feel like you are setting up like the best case scenario for them to work within, they will do their absolute best. And everybody wins in that situation.
I think that's incredibly powerful. And I think it speaks to also what we're talking about here today, particularly from a recognizing the entirety and the wholeness of all people and all employees, right? The ability for an employee to see themselves in the decision that a company makes, or hear their own voice or their own words in the way that a company talks about an issue or decides to take on an issue or not. Even down to things like, we've had some clients who are dealing with internal employee issues, and things that always rise to the top when we do interviews or surveys with employee bases on issues of culture and DEI are things that are very solvable, right? People remember things like somebody scheduled an all hands meeting or an offsite retreat during Ramadan. I can't participate in that, right? That is a very solvable thing that tells somebody you didn't see me when you planned this, right? And when those continue to happen, those are indicators of a culture that isn't prioritizing, seeing, and valuing all people for all that they have to offer. And so I think even more so than productivity, we're seeing an impact and kind of a correlation between toxic culture and retention, right? This is an employee's market. People are jumping ship left and right and looking for a place that's going to treat them better and have a better culture. And so, yes, productivity, but I think also retention. So I know we are about 3 minutes left here. I would love to ask one final kind of quick fire question to each of you. Many of the people who are participating here today are from companies where they're part of an effort to kind of push the company forward or push the organization forward. If you could think of one actionable step that a business could take tomorrow if they wanted to move beyond kind of lip service and statements to driving a real impact in their efforts to engage with and impact historically excluded communities, what do you think that first step should be? Erin, let's start with you.
I think it would be taking a step back and figuring out, what does your brand company stand for? And what is something that actually feels unique and relevant for you? Versus, and something that could be sustained over time. So versus it just being a Black History Month or something that we do during Pride, really thinking about something that is meaningful for your brand. Because I think it's easy to stay energized over the long term if it's not just a one-off opportunity. And then you can think about what are the new ways to keep building on that. So again, using Dove as an example, it's like there's the Crown Act legislation. Now we have product. Now we have the Earliest 5 campaign. We did something with like Nina Simone and there's a lot of different things that you could do to build on one overarching idea. But I think it's important that it makes sense for your brand. So that's what I would say. I would say take the step back, kind of figure out what is that North Star, what is that item for impact, and then build upon that. And it doesn't all have to happen year one. Come up with like a 3-5 year roadmap around how you're going to roll it out.
Angel, how about you next?
I would say the thing that they can do tomorrow is take a company photo. Take a company photo, look at the photo and see if the people in that photo look like the people you were like, look at that photo and would you read aloud your company's mission and vision statement to the people in that photo and they all feel like they could be a client and they would all feel welcome in your organization? Or do you look at that photo and realize that like we say we are targeting all people and we are being inclusive and we, want to do all these great things. And I didn't realize we didn't have any women. And I didn't realize she was the only Black woman here. And this is, we had one Latino man. And, like if you're making those sorts of statements where you can single out folks, when you look at that picture, I feel like that's the easy next step. You can take one picture in front of the building tomorrow morning and look at it and see if your picture aligns with your mission and vision statements.
I love that. I know Mariella is joining us because we've got to wrap this up. So Dom, any 30-second one tip?
Real quick, I think it brings kind of both together to an extent. Send out a company survey and ask people how they would describe your company and the company culture and figure out what feedback you get back and learn from it.
Awesome. Well, thank you all. I know, Mariella, you will close us out. I cannot close us out without saying, please follow and engage with Angel's store. It's amazing. Her products are everything at the Spice Suite, thespicesuite.com. And if you're interested in learning more about Dove and the Early as 5 campaign, there's a hashtag for as early as 5. It's powerful. Have tissue ready and then get ready to take some action after that. Thank you all for your time. We really appreciate it. And Mariella, I'll close it to you to close us out.
Thank you so much. And I encourage you all to join our public chat and drop links so people can easily access and support you directly there. This has been such a fruitful conversation. Congratulations to all of you. So inspired. Got a book full of notes already to kick us off. So I really appreciate your time.